joining us to the first in a series of webinars on the opportunities in emerging economies here at ISB on India. My name is Alex Hokoveen-Rutter. I'm from Canada. I'm a full-time student in the MBA program here at ISB. I came to India because of the exciting opportunities it has to offer, and that's what we'll be discussing today.
Hi everyone, my name is Spurti Zogaikar. Like Alex, I'm also a full-time student at the PGP at Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. And it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Rajendra Srivastava. He is the Dean of the Indian School of Business and the Novartis Professor of Marketing Strategy and Innovation. He's one of the world's leading authorities on marketing strategy, marketing metrics, brand management, and business model innovation. A highly cited scholar with work published in leading marketing journals and recipient of several awards and honors. We are excited to hear your thoughts, Prof, and let's begin with the first question. Why is India becoming increasingly important, do you think?
There are, of course, multiple answers to the question. One is we are one of the fastest growing economy, but everybody said that. Along with one of the fastest growing, we're also the largest economy if it comes outside in terms of economic terms, outside of the US and China, but we're on a fast track. What is happening here is a confluence of growth. We're seeing a confluence of growth, and people are used to calling BRICS as emerging markets. And what I've gathered in talking to people, the excitement about India is that it's a growth market.
Right.
An emerging market is implying, okay, it may emerge, it may not emerge, but growth economy really clearly puts front and center, that the opportunity is here. And just to put a little bit of context, especially for our listeners from outside of India, that last year the growth rate in the airline industry was 23.4%. By contrast, China was 10.7% and the US was 3.1%. In a relatively slow year, 2017 was relatively slow, the Indian automotive market grew at 13.7%. So it is the size, it is the opportunity, and one of the issues is that if one is waiting by the sidelines to figure out should I not, whether India is too risky, what's the political risk, etc. If you're going to spend your time on the sideline thinking, then by the time one enters into this market, you will have incumbents. So it's actually, better for people to look at the Indian market and come in the inception rather than at a time when the incumbents are there and you have to chase them out.
Thank you. So a lot of people, particularly in the West, kind of perceive India as a difficult place to invest, a difficult place to do business. Is this changing, and how is it changing?
It's changing quite rapidly. We've had some structural changes in rules, tariffs, and so on and so forth. But the fundamental change is, and this is my belief, that the central government, in my opinion, is making more information available. As an example, somebody from outside is going to look at India and look at, let's say, the ease of doing business, which is admittedly difficult. But if we look at Telangana, and we are right now sitting in Telangana or the neighboring state, Andhra Pradesh, or we look at some other states, the ease of doing business in these states can be actually much better than the national average. And just as if I were looking at Europe and saying, what European country should I enter Europe or not?
Right.
Then are we saying, should we enter Europe, or saying, okay, let's go to country X and let's not go to Greece?
Right.
Okay. In a similar sense, if somebody is looking for investment opportunities, market growth opportunities, it is really important for them to analyze what they want to do and where they want to do it. So if it is tourism, okay, Rajasthan and Kerala. If it is automotive production, then we should be looking at Chennai and Pune. If it is looking at IT, then they ought to be really considering Hyderabad and Bangalore.
Right.
And so it's really important to understand India because there is no one India. And if one decides to enter India and for their context decides to go to the least productive and the slowest to growth area, it's their own fault.
Thank you.
Right. In my experience, like working in the US, I found there was a lot of cultural difference. Can you maybe comment on the cultural difference between India and some of the other countries?
Now there's a big problem that the question that you posed me. I don't know which culture you're talking about when you're talking about India, because linguistically we have 14 scripts.
Right.
Okay, not 14 dialects or anything, 14 scripts. So coming from Lucknow, which is where I come from, if we have the Devanagari script,
Yes.
which is what Hindi is based on. But if I look at Telugu and if I look at Tamil, I can't read a single letter, forget a word. So that's on the linguistics part. There's also cultural differences. India, as a secular country, it's got we embrace everything. People have come into India, they've never left, and so we have a lot of cultures out here. Yes, but there are certain central cultural tendencies which sometimes are good or sometimes they're bad. So for one thing, as culturally, we never say no to anybody.
Right.
Okay, so if you ask me a question, or if you say, "Can we do this?" Instead of saying no, I will do this. Now, what does this mean? Does it mean yes, or does it mean no? So it's somewhere in between the diagonal. So there are, of course, cultural differences, across the country as well, and it is really important to understand those cultural differences. And so, as we come from a culture, and it impacts the way we do business. As an example, this was about 5-6 years ago, we were looking at game theory and saying, how in a game theoretic format, if we do X, how will the competition respond, etc. And therefore, if we can think 3 or 4 steps ahead, we could probably make a better decision.
Right.
And so in the West, the philosophy, the way we operate, comes from the Greco-Roman philosophy. So the idea is to compete. The Olympics started in Greece, and the idea is you compete to win. Now, in that kind of a scenario, if your thinking is based on winning, it doesn't mean that you collaborate. And as an example, if we take the wireless telecom business in Europe, I don't remember the current prices.
Right.
But a few years ago, when I was working with Nokia Networks and Nokia Siemens, it was Nokia Siemens before it became Nokia Networks, the pricing in Europe was about 23 euro cents a minute.
Oh.
And companies were struggling to make money. Now, how do Indian companies make money at 1 cent a minute?
Right.
Would challenge everybody's thinking.
So it was just a cost competition basically there?
No, turns out that the Indian telcos were sharing infrastructure.
Oh, right.
All right, so you got to learn to collaborate while you're competing. And of course, now we have articles with titles like co-opetition and so on. And co-opetition is something that comes more naturally in India than it would come in the West. So yes, we have cultural differences, but we can spend all our time and finish all the bottles of wine which we don't have and wait till all the cows have gone home, and we'll never answer your question fully.
Right. Well, so you talk about co-opetition and Western companies need to come in with a more collaborative mindset. Where would be a good place to start? Either, you mentioned geographies, but even in terms of sectors, or how should they get going?
So India has huge market opportunities. So if we look at why the growth rate in airlines is 23.4%, and by the way, it was limited. It would have grown further except for the availability of aircraft and pilots.
Right.
Okay, so the question is, why is there? So there are multiple reasons. Sometimes we don't have a legacy system that competes with them. So, in the West, the airlines have been in place for a long time. And what is happening out here, the industry is just beginning to take off. The second, and therefore, when that phase of the life cycle, where the growth is, much higher, because a lot of the market remains to be tapped.
Right.
So I mentioned the growth rate in US versus India. What I didn't mention at that time was in the US, an average person will take about 3.7 flights a year.
Right.
The average in India is still less than 0.1.
Right.
And so there's plenty of potential for market penetration. Same thing holds for the internet. Same thing holds for in consumer packaged goods. And so what happens is that when the economy is growing, let's say at 7.5%, not all that growth is being spread equally. So fairly or unfairly, more of that growth is going to the middle class. And what that means is that the middle class is growing, economically growing faster
Right.
than some of the other classes. And therefore, while the country rate of growth may be 7.4, for the middle class, the growth rate may be 12 or 13%.
Right.
And then the products that the middle class is looking for will see a similar growth rate.
Right. On that note, can you comment on some of the lessons learned from Flipkart's acquisition by Walmart? That's been in news all over in India here.
I think people are marveling at what Walmart was willing to pay, and made the comment many times that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Now, obviously, for Walmart, the valuation, what they were paying for 77% of the company was worth it.
Right.
Now, why was it worth it? Frankly, they lost out in China.
Yes.
All right. The market in Asia, I mean, the larger part of the market really is India and Indonesia. And if they lose out in India, like they lost out to Alibaba and so on in China, then they would be facing a situation where they don't have that potential. Second is Walmart, I look upon them as a company that is very much focused on procurement. I look at them as an upstream company.
Right.
I look at Flipkart as downstream. So Flipkart's expertise is more downstream. And very few people in the market have really been talking about the fact that one benefit to Walmart is going to be in sourcing. What people don't know is that when Walmart's growth in the US was based on, because the volume was so high, it was based on negotiating and renegotiating with their suppliers. And they would push for lower and lower costs. And then the suppliers may say, look, we can't cut anymore. We've already cut to the bone. And then the response would be, well, why don't you locate in China? I'm being very honest. So, and to some extent, when the US looks at a trade deficit with China, Walmart is partly to blame. In a similar sense, now, on a positive note, coming to India, one of the things that Walmart has to gain is a better knowledge of what's available in India and how to source products out of India. So while everybody is looking at the Flipkart plus Walmart versus Amazon, an unintended consequence may be greater efficiency into our supply chains, because
Right.
that's what Walmart is actually really good at doing. So I think this is going to be a very healthy competition. Please don't expect that others will not try to join it, because this is not meant to be a market for two people, because the penetration in e-commerce within India is tiny fraction of what it will be in 5 to 10 years. If we look at places like Mumbai, the e-commerce penetration is already about 20+%. And so imagine if that,
Rose.
it's not going to happen in rural India, I understand that, but there's a big market. And at the same time, we are seeing rapid urbanization of India. And so we'll see right now 70% of the population, or at least 2/3, 67%, is in rural India. And half of that 60% over the next 30 years is going to move to the urban areas. So the opportunities for the for the Flipkarts and for the Amazons are tremendous. And there will be other companies who also know e-commerce. And they'll say, why not me? I mean, look at Amazon. They were certainly not in the entertainment business, but look at what they're doing with Amazon Prime.
Okay. All right. So you talked about this foreign firms, in this case acquiring. So Walmart has acquired Flipkart. Amazon's come in to India with a different strategy. Can you talk about some of the different strategies foreign firms can use to get into India and how they can, what sort of relationships they can forge with local players?
So the local players actually have to learn what they have to offer. If I'm going to negotiate with you, I need to understand what you're going to give me, and I also need to know what I own that you want, and therefore being able to charge a fair price for my insight. So what do Indian companies know or have? So one thing that's really important for them to understand is what they have is India itself. Okay? We, Indian companies, have market insights. We know who the consumers are. We know what the distribution systems are in India, archaic or not. So, we have those. And we know, broadly how to reach them. Differences in languages and culture, etc. And how, because for example, a national ad may not work except for the middle class that happens to speak Hindi or may speak English or English or
Right.
the Bollywood version of it anyway. So what the Indian companies have is the market itself, and of course they have other things that they bring to the table. It would be human capital. And so if I were managing an Indian company and negotiating with a foreign partner, I want to look at what they bring to the table for me. And I may be looking for technology. I may be looking through my partnership with them for access to global markets. So they want access to Indian markets, I want access to global markets. Okay, so that kind of exchange has to take place, and I'm afraid that we are too used to balance sheet kind of thinking. And many of the opportunities may be on what I call off-balance sheet assets. People don't know, I guess you guys do. Let me ask you a question. Why the hell are you asking me questions? What do you think is the market-to-book ratio, often known as the price-to-book ratio, for Eicher Motors?
Eicher Motors. I do remember our accounting prof mentioned that the price-to-book ratios for Indian companies tend to be much smaller than those for foreign companies.
Not really. For New York Stock Exchange, the average is about 3.7 right now. For India, it's 3.6.
Okay.
Okay, this is for the Bombay Stock Exchange companies. So, not true.
Okay.
But for Eicher Motors, and I just finished teaching a class on business model innovation.
Okay.
For Eicher Motors, that ratio is about 20 to 1.
Wow.
Was about 21 a few months ago,
Right.
which is the last time I pulled up the information. Now, what that means is only 5% of the value of Eicher Motors is on the balance sheet. So the question is, where is it?
Right.
Okay, it is there in their brand, which is Royal Enfield. That's the big brand
Big
that
brand.
they have, and it is because of the growth potential in that kind of segment. In the marketplace. Of course, they produce other trucks, light trucks and so on. It's also looking at the growth potential for that market. But this ratio that I'm talking about is really indicative. And of course, it's 3.7 for India, not 20.
Right.
This is sort of indicative of the market opportunity for investing, for a FDI, for a company coming in and expanding into India, and then looking at how they can grow in a growth market,
Right.
no longer an emerging market.
Those are some astounding figures, sir. We actually have a question from our audience. Ram Mohan is asking, traditionally India has been known for outsourcing of IT services. Has the scenario changed in the last decade?
The scenario is changing very rapidly.
Right.
About a year ago, somebody came to my office, and this was a gentleman from Vietnam. And he was saying that he had started a company about 3 years ago, and he had 42,000 employees in the IT space, and he was looking for expanding into India. And what could he learn in collaboration, working with ISP and so on and so forth. So what we were doing was a bit of body shopping. I hate to use that word, but basically we had low cost labor and we were implementing it to solutions. Now we've gone up the ladder, but not significantly enough. So the harder, let's say Infosys or Tech Mahindra or whoever, the harder they work on an Oracle or SAP platform, the happier these companies are.
Right.
It's like, you guys work and we reap the benefits.
Right.
So we need to start going productizing, not just doing coding for Microsoft and so on, or building applications that sit on an ERP system. We need to start looking and being creative ourselves. And so that process is going to require design thinking, not coding or designing a software, but designing the system within which the software is going to be used. And that is something that, we can say we need to learn, but the reality is that some of the top companies in the world in this space are being managed where the CEOs are Indian.
Right.
And so I would hope that we do some things within India that attracts some of this talent back.
Right. Well, I think actually that ties in nicely with one of the questions here. So in India, one of the challenges is people often have to move for opportunities, whether it's moving abroad or moving, Garg Piyush is talking about, do we need people from rural areas to move to urban areas, or can we create opportunities in rural India? So can you comment on, are these opportunities going to be more widespread, or are they going to be concentrated on the people who, can afford to move abroad, for example?
There's a limit to how many people can move abroad. It is true right now that if I go to Terra del Fuego in the southern tip of Argentina, I'll find a chai shop. Okay, so the Indian diaspora is all over the place. It's a very entrepreneurial diaspora, and rumor has it, I haven't done the numbers on it, that if you took the GDP for this diaspora, it might be equal to the GDP for India. And
Right.
I can't even say don't quote me because I've just said this on camera.
Right.
So what is needed is, can the urban areas in India, let's say even 60% of the population is in the rural area. We know it's higher than that. So 60% of 1.2 billion, and I'm keeping my arithmetic simple, is 720 million people. If half of them move to urban areas,
Right.
How do we create space for 500,000 people? Already the infrastructure, whether it is water, the entire area around sanitation and so on, it's already under pressure. And we really need to learn. We need to rethink. We just can't say this is what happened in the US 100 years ago, this is what happened in Japan 60 years ago, and in China 20 years ago. We really have to think of a different kind of solution. So we need to come up with mechanisms where income can be generated, in the rural areas. Right now, the farmers are under stress because they only extract a fraction, tiny fraction.
Okay.
So they extract only a tiny fraction of what is available, down the value chain. And if they're armed with better information, if they know that they can get more money in this mandi compared to that mandi, the mandis are going to have to start behaving themselves.
Right.
And the middlemen are going to have to start behaving themselves. So by putting in that information, by putting in processes where the rural India can have better access to markets, or we shrink the access, we disintermediate.
Okay.
The better it is going to be for rural India. But what I'm saying is, whether it is health or income or whatever, we need to think differently, because simply employing solutions from outside is, in my opinion, given the size of this country, not going to work.
Okay.
Slightly different topic. There's a question about manufacturing. So, Abhishek is asking if the future of manufacturing is automation, then how will India lift millions of people out of poverty if low skilled jobs are not even available? And he's asking follow up, can we realistically expect service sector to provide such mass scale employment? What are your thoughts on that?
I think when we've looked at manufacturing, we really haven't looked at why manufacturing
Right.
isn't working.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just related to the tariff system. And it may be easier for Indian companies to manufacture abroad and then assemble in India. If you look at the value chain, there's not much value added in assembly.
Right.
If I go below manufacturing now, it's design. So you make more money in design than you make in manufacturing, and you make less money in assembling,
Right.
and even less money sometimes if you're trying to sell commodities.
Mm-hmm.
So we also then need to look at, can we design those things where manufacturing is going to lead to, higher value. Right now, some of the tariff structures. The other thing that is hurting Indian companies, in my opinion, are the labor laws.
Right.
And so some of these things have to be taken care of before manufacturing is going to become more productive.
Right.
Service sector is interesting. I think there's legs in those industries.
Mm-hmm.
And so while one talks about how manufacturing is available, to everybody, let me just take you in an entirely different context. When I was in the US, a friend of mine worked in Detroit, in a neighborhood of Detroit called Oakland. There was Oakland University. Oakland University was going to close down the School of Nursing because Americans didn't want to go to the School of Nursing.
Really?
Yeah, because the problem is, you're having to deal with people who are sick and terminally sick, and I know some people personally who are in that profession, and after 5, 6, 7 years, there's a little bit of a tendency to burn out.
It's unrewarding. It's
Yeah, so whatever it is. So they were going to close that school down. Then the local hospital said, you can't do that. Why? Because we need nurses. So the question is, where do we find students? Do you know where they found students? In Kerala.
Okay.
Okay? So, it doesn't, I know we're having trouble with H-1B visas,
Yes.
but as the populations get older, do they not need services, let's say, in healthcare? And so, again, we have to think a little bit more creatively in saying, where do we take services further? And in the services area, we have a big advantage. About 3-4 months ago, I was on a flight from Singapore to Hyderabad. And the person sitting next to me was a surgeon who did liver transplants. And we were chatting, and he said, I was asking him, why are you going to Hyderabad? Then he said, I'm really envious of my colleagues in India. So I said, why? Singapore, you get paid more, this, that, and the other. He said, no, you don't understand, sir. He says, if I am lucky to do 1 or 2 liver transplants a month in Singapore, my colleagues in India are doing 1 or 2 a day. So practice makes perfect. So there are some areas
The scale
where
is much
the
bigger.
scale,
Yeah.
Right.
the scale in India is so high that we can actually, and the service sector is actually one of them. So, why can't we be one of the best globally? Why do we have to be the lowest priced one?
Well, and I think that's, part of the reason I want to come to India is because there is that more opportunity in the sense of more things to work on. And yet, Alok Goro asks about the lack of focus on R&D in India. Is there essentially going to be R&D in India, or is it being overlooked? Are foreign companies going to take all this consumption pie that India is growing, or is there going to be domestic R&D as well?
Right, so there are really 2 comments I want to make. One is, indeed, the R&D is very low. So if we look at the Indian telcos, did they develop any of their own technology? They were initially buying from Ericsson, and they were buying from Nokia Siemens, now Nokia Networks. And then along came Huawei, who had a lower priced product because they already had the China Mobile contract. And because of that, they could underprice in India also. There's probably a bit of government subsidy as well. So Huawei found a way to do R&D and move up the value ladder. And now they're giving Nokia and Ericsson a run for their money in Europe. We used originally the Nokia and the Ericsson equipment. Now we're using Huawei equipment, but we never bothered to develop the technology. So earlier on, I was making the comment that there was no margin in design relative to manufacturing, relative to assembly, and so on. So we are not doing enough. I didn't mean to just pull up telecom. I think if you go across industries, we will find that we are not doing enough R&D. It is changing however. So if you take Cummins, their design center is in India, their manufacturing is in China. So it's not always true, but design is our strength. So just as we have Make in India, why can't we have design in India?
Right.
As a campaign.
Right.
Actually, a lot of design is being done in India. So one of my students from Texas, he was head of Texas Instruments India, and he told me that the Bangalore operations of TI, now this is several years ago, I don't know the current numbers, but at that time, the Bangalore center for Texas Instruments was one of the most productive when it came to research in the world. So to some extent, work is being done for the MNCs.
Right.
It is being patented in the West. So please don't undersell. What we need to do is find ways to do better value capture. So therefore we have to ask the question, why is it being patented in the West? Right? So we have to improve our IP strategies.
That's a great message. Make in India and design in India. So on that note, we have a question on the smart cities. Do you think the smart cities project is achievable, and can you comment on the scale of it?
When you have a greenfield project, it is easier compared to if you're going to try to make an existing city that was not so smart. Because we know legacy systems hold everything up. And so if you're going to, let's say, put an elevated highway within the city, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and in the meantime, other problems have sort of developed. So we will have to look at some greenfield projects. I think what the AP government is trying to do, may work because it's a greenfield project. Anyway, it should.
Sorry, could you explain for international guests what the AP government is trying to do?
Okay, AP government is trying to set up a new capital.
Right.
And this capital is going to be a modern city, and it's called Amravati. And so what they're doing is they're trying to bring in the best of technology and planning to begin with. They've engaged quite a bit with Singapore.
Okay.
And so over a period of time, Singapore was very limited in space.
Right.
So they had to use the space efficiently. And it's amazing the amount of greenery you will see in Singapore, because what they've done is they've expanded vertically.
Right.
And as they have expanded vertically, they've captured areas that were originally shops and this and that, and they made them parks.
Right.
Alright. So what Amravati is not constrained like Singapore is. But on the other hand, you have to look at the productive use of operations.
Right.
So let me give you an example of why I refused to move from Austin, Texas to New York. And the reason was, I told my wife, and she's from the northern New Jersey, kind of New York area, I said, if we move there, then I'm going to have to spend at least half an hour extra.
Just commuting.
Way. Okay, so that's about an hour a day, 250 working days a year. That's 250 hours divided by 40 hours, and that's 6 weeks of my life per year is going to have to be
travel.
So of course she was mad at me. You engineers, no point talking to you guys. And but that's my point. If within if the smart use of information and sensors and so on and so forth, if we can, let's say Hyderabad in the central city park near Begumgarh, if we were able to reduce 15 minutes each way, that's half an hour, keeping my calculations going, instead of saving, 6 weeks, we save 3 weeks.
Right.
Now, 3 weeks out of 52, I'm keeping my arithmetic simple again, is like saying we can add, 6% to the GDP, or to the GDP generated by a city.
Right.
If we can take care of traffic issues through rapid transit, through better use of information from sensors and so on. So when we think of smart cities, let's not just think tech. Let's
Right.
think of what are the problems that they're going to be solving.
Well, I think I know a lot of Canadian firms would love to get involved in infrastructure projects like smart cities. Can you speak about the opportunities for foreign firms to get involved, but also about the risks? Like, what might a foreign firm want to be wary of before investing or being involved in this sort of project?
So the one of the things is a bit of a problem. And it's not just it's agnostic of foreign versus Indian, and that is the speed at which we can implement changes. And as an example, in China, if the government decides to do something, and they say, "Oh, we're going to clean up this neighborhood and we're going to modernize it or whatever," the government can make some decisions, and the individuals have no power.
Right.
In India, rule of the law applies, and if I hold a particular property, I can slow down the process. So it's not just individuals holding things up. Sometimes the approval processes are slow, and you picked up infrastructure, so I'm
Right.
responding to infrastructure. Generally, if there's a 1-year delay and your margin was 15% and your cost of financing is 12, your margin has now come down to 3%.
Right.
And so
Significant.
speed is a bit of a problem, and so it will require meticulous planning, getting the approvals in advance and so on. So it's not particularly easy, yet the opportunity is there. If I look at again China, they have excess capacity in infrastructure development. So Chinese companies are looking for work to do, and they are in Africa, but they're also in India. So the second thing I want to bring, while delays are a problem, you will also be having to compete with other companies from other countries that may have a lower infrastructure cost. And the third thing I would mention is some of the processes are going to have to be different, because in some parts of India you can't use big machines, which you can use in a greenfield project, but you cannot use in a brownfield project.
Right. And J.H. Rao, kind of as an addendum to that, what kind of policy changes are required from government to kind of accelerate these opportunities? Is it just getting licenses quicker, or are there other things government can
No,
do?
see, the one thing to also understand about India, and that's why I would really encourage people to come and spend some time here.
Right.
We have this program called India Inside. So whether it is how to negotiate, how to understand, dealing with government and so on, it's also important to understand that there is no one India.
Right.
So there may be, a central policy doesn't mean anything if it means being implemented in Bihar or being implemented in Telangana. So you have to understand central, center, state, local, and sometimes even, within
Sub-local, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so these things get to be a bit complex, and I would suggest for a foreign company, it will take them a long time. And this is where you need an Indian partner. So either you can learn the hard way, or you can work with somebody who has the experience, and that is what a partnership will be bringing to the table. And therefore, you have to search for a partner that has a reputation for doing things right.
Great. Thank you.
Payal is asking about, we spoke about partnership and make and design in India. What are your thoughts about incubator capacities is building, and if they are, in your opinion, critical to Indian landscape as an emerging market?
Incubation, incubators could be public, they could be private.
Right.
So I'll make 2 or 3 comments. One is that our support, financial support, and giving companies a home within which to incubate, all that is fine. But what is also needed is the ability for those companies to grow without hurdles along the way. So whether it is filing GST, I don't know, I mean,
So it's a lot of policies.
what hurdles a particular startup will be facing, but so one thing we need to do is we need to simplify life for the startups.
Right.
And then the second thing I have concern about is that everybody is starting an incubator. So the people who are incubator managers, do they really know what is the ecosystem that is needed around the incubator? So you don't need just that physical space and a little bit of help here. You also need a knowledge network. What do I mean by the knowledge network? If, let's say, you're in a particular technology, are you surrounded with other people in that technology? So if you look at the success of Silicon Valley, or if you look at Amazon and so on, it's also who else that they're surrounded by, how the companies are surrounded by other companies in the ecosystem. In the knowledge network, you also need IP lawyers, you need accountants, and in the West, you'll see that there are accounting firms, IP firms that are affiliated with incubators. And initially, they're giving their money away for a song, their services away for a song, or pretty much free, with the hope that when these companies come out of the incubator, that's when they'll have a client that can afford to pay. So, we need to understand really how incubators work. We need to understand the value. For example, if we take, Mohali, a northern campus. In Mohali, you're surrounded by a lot of research institutions in the pharma, biotech kind of space. So you also need talent, right? How are you going to grow? So when you look at incubation, you also need to look at talent inflow. You also need to, worry about the financing that is available. So the linkage of private equity, you need to look for vendors and business angels. And so you need to construct this entire ecosystem. So I don't know how many incubators are actually, in a position to provide that. So actually one of the things that ISP is thinking of is really creating a learning program for incubator managers. And there's a little bit of madness to our thinking. And there's a little bit of value to our thinking. If we can get affiliated with some of the best incubators in the country, then we can proceed on step number 2, which is how do we help companies scale up.
Right.
So go-to-market strategies, business models, etc. These are things that will come naturally to our students, who 70% of whom, by the way, have a tech background. So it's not that we are tech clueless. So ISBNs are coming from technology, but our real contribution is in going to market. And what a lot of people don't know is that over 550 companies have been started through ISB, including about 50 last year. So everybody assumes that all the incubation, etc., is happening at IITs, and but this is a very thriving place for this growth.
So what would be your advice to young professionals considering a global career?
One young consider, of course, now what I'm saying is politically incorrect. Okay, so many Indian students, they go abroad, and particularly with the US, it was a green card. Now Canada is saying express entry. So if you have technology skills, etc., well, fast forward. Australia is doing a little bit of that. So a lot of nations are cherry picking talent. And many of us, including me 3 decades ago, said, okay, cherry pick me. And what I would call economic immigration. If the intention is to look at having an impact, then I would say you start here and then you explore opportunities and maybe you grow with let's say an MNC. Better yet, grow with a small company that goes global. So I would say there's if you start with a large company, then your growth prospects are
No.
kind of stunted. And so I would really recommend people to look at growth through India. And sometimes parents will say that my son or my daughter has an admission in University X, top-notch kind of school in the West. Should he or she go there, or should they focus on ISB or IM? And my answer is very simple. If what you want is economic immigration, go to the West. But if the intention is to work in India and emerging markets where we are anchored, then the network that you will inherit. Like today we have an awesome network. We have 9,700 alums and we're adding at about 1,100 a year in that space. So the ISB network or the IM network is something that one ought to be considering, because if you're part of that network, it helps you in your career.
All right. I think that kind of brings us to our final question. So we talked about growth opportunities for individuals. What do you see about kind of the growth on India, and can you kind of summarize India as a marketplace both today and in the future?
If I look at the growth opportunities for India, and by the way, I'm using this kind of logic in trying to recruit people, is you cannot look at it on a one-year basis. But let's say we take any industry, whether it is automotive or it is in consumer packaged goods, shampoo, you name it. Our market penetration of finished goods is relatively low. You go in the villages, there's still unpackaged goods, unprocessed goods at the moment, and we cook at home. And so whether it is transportation or it is food products or it is this or it is that, refrigerators, you name it, the market penetration at the moment is only a fraction of what it will be. So if we take a market that's growing at 7%, if you compound 7% for 7 years, then we're talking about a 60-70% growth. Where in the world will you be where you will get that kind of... Now, we may falter 1 year or the other, then get 5 1 year, maybe 8 another year. But is there any question that this market will grow 50, 60, 70% over the next 5 to 7 years? And in my opinion, no. So the prospects are great. The other thing is that we have a little bit, it's like trying to pat ourselves on the back. I think Indians culturally, we have a little bit of soft power. So whether it is Bollywood or yoga, I don't know. But we have a little bit of that. We need to build our reputation and quality. Sometimes we don't deliver that. We show samples with high quality, we don't deliver it. We have to develop the discipline in terms of time, etc. But the opportunities are great. And when I look at people your generation compared to people from my generation, in my generation, what you needed to do is to get an IAS job.
Right.
And you can, in those days, you could study the value of jobs and therefore people by the dowries that were being given, which were always illegal. But I think the younger generation, you guys, are much more willing to take risks. You're much more willing to partner with people globally. And I just see a very, very bright future. We just need to stay on track.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time and sharing your words and wisdom. Thank you, Spurti, for co-hosting with myself. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We will be having another webinar at the end of July, and we hope you'll join us for that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, audience.